The great space station Concordia Prime floated in the darkness between stars like a glowing jewel. It was huge beyond imagination, home to millions of beings from hundreds of different worlds. This was the center of the Galactic Council, where the most important decisions in the galaxy were made. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the busy corridors, her simple human uniform looking plain next to the colorful robes and strange bodies of alien diplomats. She carried a small data pad and moved with quiet purpose, just like she had every day for the past 12 years. Most aliens barely noticed her. To them, she was just another human, one of the newer species in the galaxy. Nothing special. Humans had joined the Council only 150 years ago, which was nothing compared to species like the Ethereal Collective, who had been spacefaring for over 10,000 years. The Council chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in great circles rising up toward a domed ceiling. The most important species sat in the front rows, their seats made of precious metals and decorated with symbols of their power. The Keth Dominion, masters of war technology, had seats of black metal that seemed to absorb light. The Zephyrian Trade Federation sat on golden thrones that showed off their wealth. Humans sat in the back, in simple chairs that looked like they came from an office building. Sarah took her place and listened as the great powers discussed trade routes and territorial disputes. When she spoke, which was rare, her voice was calm and respectful. The other ambassadors would nod politely and then continue their discussion as if she had not said anything at all. But Sarah knew something they did not see. While they talked about grand politics, humans were keeping their civilization running. In the depths of Concordia Prime, human engineers worked around the clock. They understood the station's life support systems better than anyone else. The original alien designers had built something that worked, but over the centuries, problems had appeared. Air recyclers that worked fine for silicon-based beings were killing carbon-based ones. Water purification systems that worked on one world failed completely on another. Humans had quietly fixed all of these problems. They built bridges between incompatible systems. They created solutions that worked for everyone, even species that had never met each other. The station now supported 847 different kinds of life, all breathing clean air and drinking pure water, thanks to human engineering. Dr. Marcus Webb finished his shift at the main hospital and rubbed his tired eyes. He had been on Concordia Prime for 43 years, watching over the health of dozens of alien species. Today he had saved a Zephyrian child from a rare blood disease, helped a Keth warrior recover from battle wounds, and delivered twins to a couple from the Outer Rim. The alien doctors were brilliant, but they understood only their own species. Humans had become the doctors that everyone trusted because they learned about every kind of biology. When an ethereal got sick, they came to human doctors. When two different species had children together, human doctors delivered the babies. Marcus walked past the memorial wall, where names of beings who had died serving the Council were written in letters of light. Hundreds of human names glowed there, but most aliens never read them. They saw the human medical staff as useful servants, nothing more. In the agricultural centers, human specialists worked with soil and seeds from 1,000 worlds. They had solved the Great Famine of 40 years ago, when a plague killed crops across 17 systems. They had created new ways of growing food that fed species who ate things like liquid methane or crystallized starlight. The aliens who received this food rarely knew where it came from. Trade Federation reports always credited Council agricultural programs for the success. Human names were buried in footnotes that nobody read. Sarah's assistant, David Park, brought her the daily reports. Problems solved quietly, crises prevented before they became news, disputes settled before they reached the Council floor. Humans served as neutral mediators because other species trusted them, not because they respected them, but because they did not see them as a threat. The Keth and Zephyrians would never trust each other to settle their arguments, but they would trust humans, because what could humans possibly do to hurt them? David handed Sarah a report about the mining dispute on Kepler Station. 3 species were fighting over mining rights, and the situation was getting dangerous. "The usual approach?" he asked. Sarah nodded. A human diplomat would go to Kepler Station, listen to all sides, and find a solution that made everyone happy enough to stop fighting. The solution would probably involve some clever compromise that none of the species had thought of themselves. The dispute would disappear from the news, and no one would remember that humans had fixed it. This was how humans served the galaxy. They were the glue that held everything together. But nobody saw the glue, only the things it connected. In her quarters that night, Sarah looked out at the stars and wondered how long it could continue. Humans had come to the galaxy with such hope. They had dreamed of being part of something great, of learning from ancient civilizations, of adding their voice to the grand conversation of intelligent species. Instead, they had become the servants. Useful, trusted, reliable servants, but servants all the same. They fixed what was broken, healed what was hurt, and fed what was hungry. And they were ignored. Sarah did not know that everything was about to change. Tomorrow would bring news from the outer rim that would shake the galaxy. And for the first time in 150 years, the Galactic Council would be forced to really listen to what a human had to say. The emergency alarm echoed through Concordia Prime at dawn, its sound cutting through the usual morning calm like a knife. Sarah Chen was drinking coffee in her small quarters when David Park burst through her door, his face pale with worry. "Ambassador, you need to see this," he said, handing her a datapad with shaking hands. The news was worse than anything they had seen in decades. 17 species from the Outer Rim had declared independence from the Galactic Council. They called themselves the Free Alliance, and they were not asking for permission to leave. They were simply gone. What made it worse was how they had done it. 3 Council enforcement fleets had been sent to bring them back into line. All 3 fleets had been destroyed or forced to retreat. The rebels had used tactics that no one understood, weapons that should not have worked, and strategies that seemed to come from nowhere. Sarah read the reports with growing horror. These were not wild, primitive species. These were civilized beings who had simply decided they had enough of being ignored and controlled. Their declaration of independence was written in careful, legal language. They listed their complaints clearly: unfair trade deals, ignored requests for aid, being forced to follow laws made by species who had never visited their worlds. Within hours, the council chamber was packed. Emergency sessions were rare, and this was the worst crisis in living memory. The great powers gathered in their magnificent seats while the lesser species filled the upper galleries. Fear and anger filled the air like smoke. High Arbiter Morvac, supreme leader of the council, stood at the central podium. He was Keth, 9 feet tall, with silver skin that gleamed under the chamber lights. His voice boomed across the vast room. "The rebels have made their choice," he announced. "They have rejected the peace and order that we have provided for 3,000 years. They have attacked council ships and killed council citizens. There can be only one response." General Thexvar of the Keth military stepped forward. His presentation was efficient and brutal. The cleansing protocol would target the rebel worlds with orbital bombardment. Every major city would be destroyed. Every military base would be turned to glass. The attack would be swift and total. "We estimate civilian casualties at 2.3 billion, the general said, as if he were discussing the weather. "But this will serve as an example. No other species will dare to follow their path." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then, the cheering began. Species after species stood to support the plan. They spoke of the need for order, the importance of strength, the danger of showing weakness to rebels. Sarah sat in her small chair in the back and felt sick. 2.3 billion people were going to die, and these beings were celebrating. She stood up. The chamber was so large and so noisy that at first nobody noticed. But slowly, beings began to turn and stare. A human was walking down the long aisle toward the central podium. "This never happened. Humans did not give speeches to the full council. High Arbiter Morvac watched her approach with surprise and growing annoyance. "Ambassador Chen," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "The floor has not been given to Earth. I request permission to address the council," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The High Arbiter looked around the room. Several council members were laughing quietly. Others looked curious. A few seemed annoyed that their important meeting was being interrupted by a human. "Permission granted," Morvac said, "but be brief." Sarah reached the podium and looked out at hundreds of alien faces. Many were not even looking at her. Some were having quiet conversations. They did not think she had anything important to say. "Honored council members," she began. "I have studied the reports from the Outer Rim. I have read the Rebel Declaration. I have spoken with our intelligence services about their capabilities and their goals." She paused and took a breath. "There is another way." The chamber grew quieter. A few beings stopped their conversations to listen. The rebels have legitimate complaints. Their worlds have been strip-mined for resources while receiving almost nothing in return. Their requests for infrastructure aid have been denied for 70 years. Their representatives have been ignored in every session of this council. Sarah activated the chamber's main display screen. Maps appeared, showing trade routes, resource flows, and economic data. They are not fighting because they hate the council. They are fighting because they are starving, while their resources make other worlds rich. Give them fair trade agreements. Give them real representation. Give them the aid they have requested. The rebellion will end without a single shot being fired. The chamber exploded with laughter. Councillor Vexus Thara of the Keth Dominion stood up, her forearms gesturing dramatically. "The naive little human thinks she can solve with words what our fleets could not solve with plasma cannons," she announced to the chamber. "How delightfully primitive." More laughter filled the air. Sarah stood at the podium, waiting for it to die down. Her face showed no anger, no embarrassment. She simply waited. High Arbiter Morvac raised his hand for silence. He looked down at Sarah, with the patience of an adult dealing with a confused child. "Ambassador Chen," he said, his voice gentle but condescending, "humanity's optimism is noted and appreciated. However, this council has survived for 3,000 years by understanding that some problems require decisive action, not diplomatic platitudes." He gestured to the chamber around them. "We have built the greatest civilization in galactic history through strength and unity. We cannot allow rebels to break that unity with violence." The vote was called immediately. The cleansing protocol was approved by a vote of 734 to 1. Only Earth voted against it. Sarah nodded once and thanked the High Arbiter for his time. She walked back to her seat in complete silence. Every eye in the chamber watched her, but she moved with dignity, her back straight and her head high. She said nothing more during the session. But as the council debated the details of their planned massacre, Sarah was composing a message in her mind. Within 6 hours, that message was sent to every human settlement in the galaxy. It was short, formal, and absolute. Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The news of humanity's withdrawal spread through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Most aliens heard it and shrugged. One small species out of 847 was leaving. It barely mattered. High Arbiter Morvac held a brief press conference. He stood behind his ornate podium and spoke to reporters from across the galaxy. "The Galactic Council expresses disappointment in humanity's decision to withdraw," he said, reading from a prepared statement. "We have always valued Earth's contributions to our community. However, we respect their choice to pursue independent endeavors. We wish them well in their future." Behind the formal words was a clear message. This changes nothing. The council would continue as it always had. What happened next surprised everyone. On Concordia Prime, human workers began finishing their projects with unusual care. In the engineering sections, teams worked extra shifts to complete maintenance schedules that were not due for months. They wrote detailed instruction manuals for systems they had been running for decades. They trained their alien replacements with patience, even when those replacements were slow to understand. Dr. Marcus Webb spent his last weeks at the hospital creating the most complete medical database in galactic history. He recorded everything he had learned about treating alien species, every technique he had developed, every cure he had discovered. His replacement, a young Zephyrian named Klektar, watched in amazement as Webb shared knowledge that represented a lifetime of learning. "Why are you giving me all of this?" Klektar asked. "These are your discoveries, your secrets." Webb smiled sadly as he handed over another data crystal. "Because, when I'm gone, beings will still get sick, and you'll need to help them." This scene played out across the galaxy. Human teachers trained their replacements. Human engineers documented every system they maintained. Human diplomats briefed alien colleagues on ongoing negotiations. Not a single human left their post without making sure someone could take over their duties. The withdrawal took exactly 93 days. Human cargo ships appeared at every council station, colony, and facility where humans worked. The ships were efficient and well organized, but they were not military vessels. These were moving ships, the kind families used when relocating to new homes. What struck many observers was not anger in human faces, but sadness, deep, quiet disappointment. They packed their belongings carefully, said polite goodbyes to alien colleagues, and boarded their ships with the dignity of guests, leaving a party where they had never quite felt welcome. On Kepler Station, the mining dispute that humans had been quietly managing for months suddenly exploded into violence. Without human mediators, the three species involved could not find common ground. Within a week, Keth warships were patrolling the asteroid fields, while Zephyrian merchants filed lawsuits in council courts. Station Commander Gorlak watched the human transport ship disappear into hyperspace and realized he had no idea how to solve the crisis that was tearing his station apart. The most painful goodbye happened on Concordia Prime itself. Dr. Webb had trained dozens of alien medical students over the years. They gathered in the hospital's main lobby as he prepared to leave, many of them crying in ways their species rarely showed emotion in public. A young ethereal student named Wisptel floated forward, her energy field flickering with distress. "You saved my life during the plague outbreak," she said, her voice barely audible. "You stayed awake for 6 days straight, working on a cure for my people. You never asked for credit. You never asked for anything." Webb put a gentle hand on her energy field, feeling the warm tingle that meant she trusted him completely. "Take care of them," he said quietly. His words would be remembered later, when the hospital staff realized what he meant. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Human agricultural specialists left their posts, but not before ensuring that current crops would survive. Human logistics coordinators handed over supply chain management, but warned about potential problems that might arise. On the trade station of New Babylon, human coordinator Lisa Zhang spent her final week creating warning systems for supply chain failures. She had been managing resource flow between 47 systems, preventing shortages before they became critical. Her Zephyrian replacement, Trade Master Quilax, studied the complex charts and data streams with growing confusion. "How do you keep track of all this?" he asked, gesturing at displays showing thousands of resource flows across space. "You learn to see the patterns," Lisa explained. "When mining output drops on Xerion 3, food prices rise in the Outer Rim 6 months later. When the Keth military increases production, medical supplies get short because they use the same rare metals." Quilax nodded, but Lisa could see he did not really understand. He was thinking in terms of individual transactions, not the vast web of connections that kept civilizations fed and supplied. "What happens if I miss something important?" he asked. Lisa paused in her packing. People go hungry, she said simply. Or they fight over what's left. The most telling moment came when Counselor Vex Thara, who had mocked Sarah Chen's speech, found herself watching human families board transport ships from an observation deck. She had come to gloat, to enjoy the sight of the primitive humans leaving in defeat. Instead, she watched human children say goodbye to alien friends they had grown up with. She saw human parents comforting those friends, promising to stay in touch. She watched elderly humans taking one last look at the station they had called home for decades. For reasons she could not explain, Vex Thara felt an uncomfortable tightness in her chest. These beings were not fleeing in shame. They were leaving with quiet dignity. And somehow, that made her feel small. As the last human transport ship prepared to depart, it broadcast a final message to Concordia Prime. Not a speech or a protest, but a simple list. The names of every human who had died, serving the Council over the past 150 years. Scientists who had given their lives researching cures for alien diseases. Engineers who had died fixing systems that kept other beings alive. Diplomats who had been killed trying to prevent wars between species who barely remembered their names. The message ended with 12 words. Thank you for letting us serve. We hope you find peace. Then they were gone, disappearing into the vast darkness between stars. The galaxy suddenly seemed a little emptier, though most beings could not say why. The first sign of trouble came 6 days after the humans left. Chief Engineer Brocktool was having his morning meal when the alarm started screaming. He rushed to the control center of Concordia Prime's life support systems, expecting to find a minor malfunction. What he found instead was chaos. Atmospheric processors were failing throughout the station. Air recycling systems that had worked perfectly for decades were producing toxic gases. Water purification plants were creating sludge instead of clean water. Temperature controls were either freezing entire sections or turning them into ovens. What happened? Brocktool demanded, as his team scrambled to fix the problems. His assistant, Thekmore, pulled up diagnostic reports on the main screen. The systems are working exactly as designed, he said, confusion clear in his voice. But the designs don't make sense anymore. They spent 3 weeks trying to understand what the humans had done. What they found amazed and horrified them. The humans had not just maintained the life support systems. They had completely rebuilt them. Over decades, they had quietly connected incompatible technologies, created bridges between systems that were never meant to work together, and solved problems that the original designers had never even noticed. Without the humans to maintain these connections, everything was falling apart. The real crisis began 2 months later when the cleansing protocol was launched against the Outer Rim rebels. High Arbiter Morvac stood in the Council's war room, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Hundreds of Council warships moved toward rebel worlds, ready to end the rebellion with overwhelming force. Fire, he ordered. The orbital bombardment began exactly as planned. Rebel cities turned to glass under the assault. Military bases disappeared in flashes of nuclear fire. It should have been the end of the rebellion. Instead, it was the beginning of a galaxy-wide catastrophe. Within hours, 17 more species declared independence from the Council. The sight of entire worlds being destroyed had terrified neutral systems throughout the galaxy. They looked at the smoking ruins of rebel cities and realized that the same thing could happen to them. The Altair Federation was the first to leave, followed by the Centauri Republic. Then the Vegan Alliance announced they were reconsidering their membership. 3 species that had been loyal council members for over 1,000 years packed up their embassies and left Concordia Prime. General Thexvar tried to explain to the High Arbiter what was happening, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Our intelligence was wrong, he admitted. We thought we were facing 17 rebel species. We were actually facing a network of over 40 systems. The bombardment has turned the entire Outer Rim Against us. Worse, the rebels had help. Without human intelligence analysts to interpret enemy communications, the Council had completely missed the scope of the rebellion. Human diplomats had been quietly tracking dissatisfaction throughout the galaxy, warning about potential uprisings before they happened. Without their reports, the Council was flying blind. The Zephyrian Trade Federation faced economic collapse as supply chains disintegrated. Trademaster Quilax, who had replaced human coordinator Lisa Zhang, stared at charts showing cargo shipments backed up throughout the galaxy. "I don't understand," he told his staff. "The humans made this look so easy." His chief analyst, a brilliant Zephyrian named Klimtar, had been studying Lisa Zhang's old reports for weeks. They weren't just moving cargo, Klimtar explained. They were predicting problems before they happened. When mining dropped on Zirion 3, they had already arranged alternative supplies from 6 other worlds. When the Keth military needed rare metals, they had stockpiles ready. Quilax looked at the chaos on his screens. And now? Now we're reacting to each crisis as it happens. By the time we know there's a problem, it's too late to fix it. Food shortages appeared on 47 worlds as human agricultural specialists carefully balanced growing systems collapsed. Without their expertise, alien farmers could not maintain the hybrid crops that fed billions. Familiar foods became scarce, and unfamiliar diseases began appearing in livestock. The Council's military faced their own disasters. 3 major operations failed spectacularly without human tactical advisors. What the generals had dismissed as simple support turned out to be crucial strategic planning. Colonel Vecton of the Keth Third Fleet reviewed the disaster at Proxima Station with growing horror. His forces had walked into an obvious trap, losing an entire battle group to rebel ships that should have been easy targets. "How did we miss the rebel fleet hiding behind the moon?" he asked his intelligence officer. The officer checked his reports and paled. The humans used to provide tactical analysis for fleet movements. They were tracking patterns we never noticed. One start as patterns. We have a Clive Hand. One start as patterns. We have Clive Hand as patterns. With alive. With 1,000 start as pattern. We have product sent. We have Clive patterns. But the worst crisis was one that nobody talked about. The psychological evaluations of Council forces revealed widespread trauma and depression. Without human medical staff to provide mental health support, soldiers were breaking down under the stress of constant warfare. Dr. Klektar, who had replaced Dr. Marcus Webb at Concordia Prime's hospital, found himself overwhelmed by patients he did not know how to treat. Keth warriors were having panic attacks. Zephyrian pilots were refusing to fly. Ethereal soldiers were losing their energy coherence under stress. Webb had left behind detailed medical files. But Klektar realized that the human doctor had been providing more than just medical treatment. He had been a counselor, a friend, and a source of hope for beings from dozens of species. How did he do it? Klektar asked himself, as another soldier was brought in, suffering from what humans called battle fatigue. He found his answer in Webb's personal notes, which the human had left behind. Page after page of observations about alien psychology, techniques for providing comfort across species barriers, and methods for helping traumatized beings heal. One note stood out. Every being wants to be understood. If you listen without judgment and care without condition, healing becomes possible. Klektar tried to apply Webb's techniques, but he lacked the human's natural empathy. High Arbiter Morvac sat in his private chambers, reviewing reports that grew worse each day. The galaxy was falling apart, and he was beginning to understand why. A soft chime announced a visitor. Junior analyst Zeph Ali of the Ethereal Collective entered, her energy field flickering with nervous light. "High Arbiter," she said. "I have been studying the pattern of failures since humanity's departure. I believe I have found the cause." Morvac gestured for her to continue. "The humans were not just useful," Zeph Ali explained. "They were essential. They served as the connective tissue of our civilization. They prevented problems we never saw coming and solved crises we did not know we had. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy before and after humanity's departure. The difference was shocking. We treated them like servants, she continued, but they were actually our immune system. Morvac stared at the display for a long moment. What do you recommend? We need them back, Zefali said simply. The galaxy is dying without them. 18 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in 1,000 years. What had once been a proud alliance of 847 species was now barely half that size. Wars raged across 3 sectors of space. The galactic economy was collapsing. Food shortages affected dozens of worlds. High Arbiter Morvac called an emergency session, but the Great Council chamber looked empty with so many seats vacant. Where once hundreds of species had gathered in unity, now only the core powers remained, along with a handful of smaller worlds too afraid to leave. Junior analyst Zefali stood before the remaining council members, her energy field dim with exhaustion. She had spent months analyzing the crisis, and her conclusions were devastating. Honored council members, she began. I have prepared a complete analysis of our current situation. The numbers are clear. In every area where humans provided services, our performance has declined dramatically. She activated the chamber's main display. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing the scope of the disaster. Diplomatic success rates have dropped by 78%. System failures are up by 300%. Economic productivity has fallen by an average of 23% across all sectors. Psychological wellness indices in our military have collapsed. The chamber was silent. These beings had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, but they were finally seeing the truth about their civilization. Most importantly, Zefali continued, the rebellion could have been resolved through negotiation, exactly as Ambassador Chen proposed. Our own analysis confirms that the rebels' demands were reasonable and could have been met at a fraction of the cost of the current war. Councillor Vexathara, who had mocked Sarah Chen's speech 18 months earlier, felt sick. Her own species, the Keth, had lost 2 entire fleets in battles that could have been avoided. What do you recommend? High Arbiter, Morvac asked, though he already knew the answer. We must ask the humans to return, Zefali said. The galaxy needs them. We need their wisdom, their compassion, and their ability to see solutions where we see only problems. The vote was unanimous. Not because they agreed with each other, but because they had no choice. Crafting the message to humanity took 3 days. Every word was debated, every phrase considered. The final message was unlike anything the Council had ever sent. To the human species, and to Ambassador Sarah Chen, it began. The Galactic Council formally acknowledges that our treatment of humanity was based on arrogance and misunderstanding. We failed to recognize the invaluable contributions you made to galactic civilization. We failed to appreciate that your preference for peaceful solutions reflected not weakness, but wisdom. The message continued with painful honesty. We are not the same council you left. We are humbled. We are ready to listen. The galaxy needs humanity, not as servants, but as guides. The message was broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies. Every remaining council world heard it. More importantly, so did the rebel systems and the neutral worlds that had left the council. Humanity's response came 3 days later. A single transport ship appeared at the edge of Concordia Prime's space, requesting permission to dock. The ship was small and simple, carrying only 1 passenger, Ambassador Sarah Chen. Word of her arrival spread quickly through the station. Aliens who had barely noticed her before now watched her every move. She walked through the corridors with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. But now, beings stepped aside to let her pass. The council chamber had been specially prepared for her return. Her old seat in the back had been replaced with a place of honor near the central podium. But Sarah ignored the new seat and walked directly to the podium itself. High Arbiter Morvac rose from his throne. Ambassador Chen, he said, his voice carrying a respect that had never been there before. Welcome back to the council chambers. Sarah looked out at the half-empty chamber, seeing the faces of beings who had once dismissed her as unimportant. Now, they watched her with desperate hope. We never wanted to leave, she said simply. We believed in what the council could be. We still do. She paused, letting her words settle. But we will not return to be your servants or your afterthought. If we come back, it will be as equals, with a voice in decisions that affect all our futures. And there will be conditions. The conditions were clear and non-negotiable. Humans would hold permanent seats on all major committees. The use of orbital bombardment against civilian populations would be forever banned. A new Office of Galactic Ethics would be established, with human oversight. Most importantly, the Council would commit to resolving conflicts through diplomacy before considering military action. High Arbiter Morvac did not hesitate. The Council accepts all conditions without debate. Sarah nodded. Then, we will return. But understand this. We are not coming back to fix your mistakes. We are coming back to help you avoid making them in the first place. As she spoke, something unprecedented happened. Councillor Vex Thera rose from her seat. In 3,000 years of council history, no member had ever stood during another's speech. But Vex Thera stood, and then others followed her lead. Soon the entire remaining council was standing, showing respect that had never been given to any species, let alone humans. Welcome home, High Arbiter Morvac said quietly. We have learned that a civilization without compassion is not civilization at all. Over the following weeks, human ships began returning to council space. Not as many as before. Humanity had learned to be more selective about where they placed their trust, but enough to begin healing the galaxy's wounds. Dr. Marcus Webb returned to Concordia Prime's hospital, where his young replacement Klektar greeted him with tears of relief. Human engineers returned to fix the life support systems. Human diplomats began the long work of negotiating with the rebel systems. The first breakthrough came when the Outer Rim rebels agreed to peace talks. The negotiations took place on neutral ground, with human mediators helping both sides find common ground. The final agreement gave the rebels the fair treatment they had always wanted, while keeping them within a reformed council structure. The galaxy began to heal. It would take years to fully recover from the damage caused by 18 months of human absence. But the process had begun, guided by the species that had walked away quietly and returned with grace. In her private quarters, Sarah Chen looked out at the stars and smiled. They had found their voice in the galaxy at last. Not through conquest or revenge, but by proving that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to walk away with dignity. The humans were home.